Columbus Schools culture of cheating, and OSU gets a new leader.
From the Battelle Studio at WOSU at COSI, this is Columbus on the Record. Joining Mike Thompson this week, Kathy Kandinsky, State House reporter for the Columbus Dispatch, William Hershey, writer and retired State House reporter, Dale Butland, communications director for Innovation Ohio, and Bob Clegg, Republican strategist.
We knew it was going to be bad, but laid out there in black and white and in front of the microphones and TV cameras, it seemed even worse. State Auditor Dave Yost this week provided details of what he called a culture of cheating at Columbus City Schools. He says administrators changed thousands of grades and manipulated attendance figures for years. Here are the highlights. The audit found that very senior officials oversaw the rigging, which emails indicate began as early as 2002. In the year closely inspected by the auditors, they found 500,000 absences were erased and 7,000 grades were changed, most from failing to D or better. Administrators called changing the grades D'ing them up, and they called enrolled 12th graders who did not attend class 12th grade zombies. And while she was not implicated directly, many witnesses told investigators that former Superintendent Gene Harris knew of the rigging.
This is a situation where we have a generation of kids in Columbus schools who there are members of that generation who were left behind, who didn't get the resources or the attention or the opportunity that they were entitled to. And it's because the adults cheated.
Kathy Kandinsky, any surprises in this report?
I think the big surprise, I suppose, is that just how widespread this was, how long it had gone on, to what extent it had gone on, and then, of course, the very strong implication that Gene Harris did, in fact, know what was going on, that this issue had come up over the years, and that it was accepted. It was nurtured, and it was allowed to continue. And it's just surprising to me that there isn't more outrage about it. As we just heard Dave Yost say, lots of kids were left behind as a result of this. The system failed these kids, and there's just not a lot going on. Any goodwill that the Columbus schools may have in the community has, been erased a good part because of this that went on. I just don't understand why there's not a lot more outrage.
How did it go on for so long? People had been reported up the chain, but then quashed, right?
Well, I think it was a wink, wink, nod, nod type of system where they developed this cheating. As Dave Yost said, they developed this system to cheat, to change grades, to not count dropouts, and everybody seemed to, all the top administrators seemed to think it was okay. At one point, Gene Harris made a joke and covered her ears when somebody was talking about it at an administrator meeting. I agree with Kathy in that I don't understand why people are not enraged, but I think we have seen some of that in that the levy that was on the ballot last November lost by over 2-1, and I think that was the voters of Columbus expressing their outrage at what happened.
I think that's right, and I'm someone who lives in the city of Columbus, have family who work for the Columbus City Schools. There's plenty of outrage among the people I know. I don't know if you expect them to start burning buildings down, but the levy went down resoundingly. And teachers who knew about this refused to change grades. They were outraged. They're still outraged. And the kids are the ones who suffered from this.
Well, the good news is that Auditor Yost pointed out that the teachers who were described as heroes in this, he put the blame squarely at the feet of administrators. That's point one. Point two is that punishment is being meted out. There are 11 people who have resigned prior to this report coming out. 4 principals are now being fired, and 2 members of the school board who were there during this period lost their seats in the last election. So hopefully things are moving in the right direction.
And the president of the school board during this time is leaving as well.
Right.
The question remaining is what's going to happen? Are there going to be any criminal charges as a result of this? And what we're hearing from a lot of people, feedback is, how are these people going to be allowed to keep their public school pensions after something like this? And I am told that is in fact the case. They will be able to keep them unless there's some criminal charges and felony convictions as a result that would jeopardize those pensions.
The school board, they had this policy governance, hands off. Heart might have been the right place. We don't want to micromanage. But when you don't micromanage and you take that too far, there's no oversight. And Yost pointed that out, saying the school board didn't do its job during this
That's what
crisis.
the school board was supposed to do, oversight this governance policy. It just doesn't make sense, but I think it was promoted by Superintendent Jean Harris and her top allies, and those who were elected to the school board who challenged it were marginalized. If you think about the members who quit, there wasn't anybody in power on the school board who was able to get traction who succeeded.
You know, Auditor Yost did a great job with this. And speaking of school scandals, I hope he now would be willing to turn his attention to another one that has the potential to make this one look like small potatoes. This year, charter schools in this state will get $887 million worth of taxpayer money, 93% of which goes into the pockets of the charter school operators, many of whom are for-profit. And yet the taxpayers have no idea how that money is being spent. They have, because there's never a public audit.
It goes to what he was saying about the honor system. And Kathy, maybe you could talk about this. The State Board of Ed had what he called an honor system, where the schools had to sort of police themselves.
Correct.
And he gently said, that ain't working. And they might change it.
Are you talking about the State Board of
State
Education?
Board of Education, who receives these figures from the districts.
Right. You're right. And there hasn't been much aggressiveness or much interest in really giving any firm oversight, much like what you're seeing with the Columbus City School Board. It's like, who's willing? I mean, if you're going to take a position on one of these boards, are you willing to kind of make decisions and go against the norm for, to help protect students, taxpayers, whatever? And that's what we're not seeing. We're just not seeing that. I thought it was kind of interesting that somewhere along the line in this Columbus school investigation, the Department of Education reviewed their policies at Columbus to see if they were doing their data collecting correctly. And they found that the policy that they had in place was good. Well, did anyone think that maybe they should check to see if they were following the policy? Yeah. It seems idiotic to me. I just don't understand. But you got to have people in place on these boards that are willing to take those kind of steps. In this case, they weren't.
And is it tough to? I mean, he talked about this bunker mentality and retaliation, and employees were in tears as they spoke to investigators. I assume if you're a new school board member and you're coming on, and the superintendent's been there for a decade or so, and the teachers' unions are there, and the administrators have been there a long time, it has to be tough to challenge the powers that be.
Well, the board, gave the superintendent all that power, and then that power was used wrong. I mean, for intimidation purposes. What I'm wondering about is what's the next step here for the school system? They tried to put that levy on the ballot in November. It didn't work. I don't know where Mayor Coleman fits in, whether he's going to try to come up with another plan now that they had to get this report out of the way before they could do anything else.
Don't you think they need to acknowledge what happened and maybe even apologize for what happened? I mean, that's kind of what strikes me, is that there's no acknowledgement. It's almost like Bill Bush had a very interesting story this week about the board meeting and talking about crisis communication and how to respond to the questions they were going to get, rather than to respond to the situation at hand. It's
the superintendent, the school district has made some changes, and Yost praised them for some of the kind of tightening up the accountability and having several layers of monitoring of data reporting and data collection. So they have made some changes, but you're right, Kathy. You haven't seen somebody get mad You haven't seen somebody get really mad who's within the school
gets
system.
lost, I think what people should get mad about is absenteeism in big city schools is a serious problem. And I think this is an example of what President Bush once called the bigotry of low expectations. The people who put this policy into effect apparently didn't think these kids could be made to attend school, so they took a shortcut. And that continues to be a problem. And until it's solved, education in city schools is going to be a problem. And I'd like to see the school board seriously attack that. It's no guarantee of a win, but it's a problem that has to be solved if schools are going to be better.
If I could just add to the point I made earlier, that's exactly why I'm suggesting there ought to be an audit of these charter schools. We talk about a generation of lost kids. What we know about the charter schools is that around 85% of them have lower graduation rates than do traditional public schools, and many of the ones in the big cities have lower graduation rates than Cleveland public schools, for example. So there's this hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money going into these schools, and the results
at-risk students that are in these schools.
But that's what
that's why they're not going to have the same success rates. You can't.
That's what I'm trying to tell you about. They have a worse success rate. They have a worse success rate than the traditional.
Suggesting that there shouldn't be the same level of oversight as on the charters, as they're all public schools, they're all public students.
But it all
it's
goes
all the same thing.
It goes to this. It goes to this pressure to fudge the numbers. If the pressure to fudge the numbers was great 10 years ago, it has only increased, and state tests are tougher. The stakes are higher. Teacher and principal pay is often tied to the testing. Everyone buying a house looks at test scores and school grades. And now, if Ohio third graders can't pass a reading test, they have to repeat that grade. Bill Hershey, the temptation to test now is only growing. So how do we stop it?
Grows and grows. We have the state report cards and the measures you look at, but even more basically for administrators in the Columbus City schools, their very jobs were tied to fudging these numbers. We had a good example in Dave Yost's audit of the, I think, assistant or deputy superintendent who went to the schools and saw empty seats and low attendance rates, and he brought it up with the superintendent. He was marginalized. He left town for another job. If you didn't go along, you lost your job. So if you were an employee or administrator, you lost your job. And if you were a parent looking for a school, as you said now, you're going to look at these numbers, and the numbers lie. And the temptation is to make the numbers better and better and better.
So is the solution harsh penalties if you get caught? I mean, really felony convictions?
Yes, because we've got to have some system of accountability here. Now, granted, we had one in place that they somehow figured out a way to get around and cheat, but we've got to have accountability. So if that means we have to get tougher on school systems and administrators who do try to do this, then we're going to have to do it.
Well, you know, they also might want to consider giving schools more time to achieve the goals. You know, it seems like every year the legislature comes out with new benchmarks that the schools have to meet. And so it kind of feeds into this whole, we got to get there, we got to get there, we got to get there. Well, maybe they need a little more time to get there. And maybe if there wasn't quite, I don't know, maybe the expectations need to be more in check. Maybe that would help kind of ease the pressure. Because you're right, when your job's on the line or your district report card is, you know, going to look terrible, there's too much temptation.
It's like on Wall Street where you have to make the next quarter's numbers look good.
It's a lot of pressure on these schools, on these
temptation to
teachers,
cheat.
everybody.
But I think it's important to and look. First off, I'm not a huge fan of high-stakes testing, particularly since I know these tests were designed to be diagnostic tools for teachers. They weren't intended to be used as the means to rating them in the schools. But having said that, a high-stakes test is no excuse for cheating, whether it's done by students or it's done by the adults who should be setting the example. The SAT is a very high-stakes test. It can determine whether you get into the college of your choice. But nobody would argue that cheating on that test is okay because it's a high-stakes test. And I don't think we should pretend that doing data scrubbing and grade changing is in any way acceptable.
Well, the whole reason for all this stuff is to make sure kids graduate with a diploma that means something.
Yeah.
So we've now made sure that all these kids in Columbus have graduated with a diploma that means nothing.
All right. Our next
Not all of them, Kathy.
No, not all. I'm just saying the kids that are. No, I didn't mean to.
It does hurt. There's a cloud over the district.
Those people that were scrubbed,
yeah, that will remain for a while. Our next topic. Many thought it couldn't be done, that it was an impossible task, but OSU has done it. They have found someone to replace Gordon Gee. Michael Drake will be Ohio State University's 15th president. He comes to OSU from the University of California, Irvine, where he was chancellor. He's a physician, an eye doctor. He has helped guide the rapid growth at UC Irvine and led its medical center. He calls the OSU job the capstone of his career.
This university is outstanding, but it's also a university that's clearly on the move. The preparedness of the students, the excellence of the faculty, its capacity to solve global problems, and its noble adherence to the land-grant mission, that mission of access to education and that mission to serve the communities in which our universities are situated, make this an incredible place to be.
Kathy Kandinsky, what's the buzz? What are people saying about Michael Drake?
It's all new. This is the honeymoon period here, so it's all very positive.
First day of the honeymoon.
First day of the honeymoon, so I haven't heard a lot yet. Not that I expect to. But certainly his credentials are fantastic. He seems to fit perfectly with what Ohio State would be looking for. He's known to be a prolific fundraiser. He has a medical degree, as you mentioned. He has a reputation for building UC Irvine's reputation as a research institution, which is exactly what we're talking about here. And he has shown a very much of an interest in engaging the business community and looking at economic development in Ohio, or at least in Central Ohio. So all these things look great. I mean, I think people are real happy about it.
As we monitored the search for the past 7 months, we kept hearing they wanted to hire somebody who had led a university before, who had been a university president or chancellor, not a provost, not a vice president. We also heard they were thinking about someone from the business community, someone way outside, like a banker or something like that. So this person is not that. Any surprise that they didn't go bold with somebody from outside the university?
I think they kind of got the happy medium by going with somebody with a medical background that's a physician, because I think I found that interesting, because I think it talks about where they may be looking here in the future, and they're looking at the Wexner Medical Center. They're looking at medical research. I think they're looking down the road, and they wanted to get someone who could help them get down that road, and that's why they went with it.
Plus, the medical centers, it's not just the research, it's the whole healthcare landscape is changing. It's starting with the Affordable Care Act and, the competition for patients and baby boomers aging and things like that.
It's a real growth area.
What about the problems that he had at University of Irvine, though, that were mentioned in some of the stories with the Muslim student group and with some of the faculty members who thinks he were too autocratic? Do you think those are just marginal issues, or?
Doesn't seem to be. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. But I think it's going to be hard to find anyone who has led a university of the size he has that there's not some kind of issues or disagreements along the time. But it doesn't seem like there's anything,
One of the big complaints about him was the students and the faculty both said that he didn't really listen to them enough. He was cutting them out of the decision-making process. My sense is that often happens at a college or university. There's often complaints about that. You're right, Bill. There was another issue about Muslim students being arrested. There was another one about the law school dean being fired and then rehired right away. But, look,
I don't think he was fired. They offered him a job. They rescinded, then they offered it again, and he took it.
Well, the Orange County Register said he was fired and then rehired immediately. But be that as it may, time will tell. My view is that at least, I think this gentleman is not going to make any insulting jokes about Catholics or demand a salary and a lifestyle that would make Donald Trump blush. So that's progress.
That's the bad side. The good side is Gordon Gee was beloved on the campus. The business community loved him. He raised a ton of money. Can he escape? Can Michael Drake escape Gordon Gee's shadow?
Yes, but it's a really tough act to follow, and I think he's gonna have to be his own person and do his own thing. I think he'll find that being here at Ohio State is going to be a lot different than it was out in California. I think even the whole culture of the academic world is different here than it was out there, and I think he'll like it. I mean, I think it'll be but it's going to be a tough act for him to follow.
He's definitely more low-key. I mean, just in the first hours we've seen him speak and interact with people, he's definitely more low-key. Doesn't mean he's not a good backslapper or a good fundraiser, but he's not Gordon Gee.
But who isn't more low-key than...
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But, the board might say, look, let's find somebody who has a very different personality so the person is not always compared to Gordon Gee. If they brought in somebody who was, similar, they would be behind the 8 ball in some ways.
Gordon Gee is just a really personable guy, and so that in that way it's going to be a tough act to follow. But we'll see. He's got good credentials.
All right. Next topic, President Obama tried two things this week in his State of the Union address. He tried to send some positive, cooperative vibes to Congress, and he called them to, in his words, give America a raise. In his address and at a next-day visit to a Costco store in Maryland, the president said the minimum wage is too low, and he said increasing it will help the economy as a whole.
So right now in Congress, there's a bill that would lift the federal minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. 10.10. 10.10. It's easy. It will give more businesses, more customers with more money to spend. I guarantee you, if workers have a little more money in their pocket, they'll spend more at Costco.
Bob Clegg, Republicans tout the benefits of trickle-down economics. This is kind of trickle-up economics. Can't that work as well?
Well, I mean, it could, except for the fact that when you're adding that additional cost, especially to small businessmen that maybe have 3 or 4 or 5 employees, that means their costs go that much higher. That means any future employees that they were planning on hiring won't be hired. And yeah, I mean, it's great to have more money in the pocket of workers, but if that worker loses a job because the cost of that employer has gone up because he's had to raise, the wages, then that's a problem.
Well, actually, the Economic Policy Institute just released a study this week on this very question. And what they concluded was that not only that raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, that's in 3 steps by 2015, would not only hurt small business, it would actually help them. And here's why. 28 million people would be affected. That's everyone earning between $7.25, the current minimum, and the $10.10.
The federal minimum, $7.25.
Yeah, there would be 28 million people affected. Their wages would increase by about $35 billion. Those people would spend that money immediately because they have to. They buy the washing machines and the TVs and the cars to get the economy moving. That in turn would create, in their view, 85,000 new jobs across the country, many of them going to smaller firms.
But we're already seeing with Obamacare where costs have gone up, medical costs have gone up, where companies are cutting back hours so they can fall below that 30-hour, minimum for a full-time worker, or they're just not going to have, healthcare coverage. We're already seeing, small businesses being hurt because of additional costs. And what are they doing? They're cutting back. So, I mean, this is what's happening currently.
Well, they're actually not. But be that as it may, this issue polls off the charts. 72% of the public, including 56% of Republicans, support raising the minimum wage. Why, Mike? I think you need to ask that.
Well, Ohio voters, Kathy, they voted for a constitutional amendment a few years back that raised it at the time and then hooked it to inflation. So Ohio's minimum wage now is at $7.95. It's not the $10 an hour that the president wants, but it's better.
But why do we have a minimum wage, Mike? It's because people agree, Democrat, Republican, Independent, that people who work full-time should not have to live in poverty.
Well, that's the question. Is the minimum wage designed to be a living wage?
No, it's not. I mean,
was it designed to be a living wage?
I don't know what it was designed to be, but if you're working minimum wage, you're going to still qualify for all kinds of government assistance programs because it's not considered enough to support you or your family. So it's not. The question is, I mean, and we've raised it. Is who do you put? Is it does government want to put that on employers? That's the question.
But it's not going to pass the House of Representatives anyway, is it, Bob?
No, it's not. So it won't matter. But it wasn't intended to. You've got to realize the president did this for the campaign this year, for 2014. Yeah, really. And that's why Dale talks about everybody being in favor of it.
Or maybe because 70% of the public would like to see it, Bob. How about that?
The fact is that
and over 50% don't want Obamacare, but he won't take that away, will he?
That's already a law, Bob.
Yeah, I know.
The bottom line is the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation over the past 40 years. If it had, it would be at about $10.50 an hour.
That's right.
So he's basically trying to get it to where it was back in the mid-'60s. So
it's got lower buying power today than it did in 1968 because it's been so eroded by inflation. To Kathy's point, a person working full-time at the minimum wage makes $15,000 a year. That is below the poverty line of $19,000 for a family of 3. And, as Bill points out, what happens? We end up subsidizing, the taxpayers do, through these assistance programs. employers who refuse to pay their workers a living wage.
I thought you got the 10-second last word.
But you don't have anything tied to you're going to raise the minimum wage and you're going to take away public assistance. I mean, it's all kind of where you're going to put your money.
All right, we got to get to our final off-the-record parting shots, so we'll let Bob Clegg go first.
We have a filing deadline here in the state of Ohio next Thursday, and I don't think we're going to see any real great surprises.
Will Todd Portune jump into the Democratic race?
I don't think he'll even have enough time to collect 1,000 signatures by the time he makes his final decision.
And John Kasich has no primary opponent either.
From what I heard, no.
Okay. Dale.
Remember CoinGate, the scandal 6 years ago that landed Tom Noe in jail for ripping off millions of dollars in taxpayer money? Well, this week the Toledo Blade, which broke the story, sued the Inspector General of Ohio for not releasing the investigative report that he promised to do 2 years ago. Some people think the reason is a lot of Republicans who were not part of the 19 convicted still have very influential positions. I say stay tuned.
And Bill.
I met Pete Seeger just once, more than 40 years ago. But before and since then, he provided the soundtrack of my life and many other people. One of his songs was If I Had a Hammer. Pete didn't need a hammer. He had a banjo.
And Kathy.
I just can't believe the CoinGate was only 6 years ago. It seems longer. I'm going to predict that we will not see criminal charges out of this whole Columbus Schools things as much as a lot of people would like to see them. I just don't think they're going to be able to go there.
No Super Bowl picks. No Super Bowl picks.
Not gonna go there.
As you may know, I'm a lifelong Patriots fan. I'm still hurting over the Broncos' defeat of the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. So I should be rooting for Peyton Manning and former Patriot Wes Welker, but in a totally bitter and selfish mood, I'm going to root for the Seahawks. So go Seattle. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online, Twitter, Facebook, WOSU.org. We're all on the digital realm. For our crew here at WOSU at COSI and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.